Well, hello folks, and welcome to episode 199.9. I'm going to give us no more get-outs. We were going to do a special edition episode this week of great interest, I think, to everybody. However, the magnitude of the task involved in creating this episode, magnitude for Jamie behind camera of creating this episode, had maybe been a little underestimated. And Jamie's off on Friday, so he's on a 4-day week, and that week is not going to be sufficient for us to successfully do that episode. So instead, we're going to do another normal, conventional episode this week. And we're going to do the special next week. So we're on 199.9. We've got no more get-outs, so it's got to work next week. But this week, conventional episode, back in the fabrication shop, starting as normal, and we'll adventure around from there. We're going to start with Project Portofino, as it is called, the XJ Coupe, which there is steady progress on. Tom has been working on his own on this week because Matt has moved on to something else, which we'll come to in a little bit. So Tom's working on the back end of this still. We've got a few little bits to sort out, these rear corners being one of them. The fit of these left a bit to be desired, as it was. It was a little bit short in various places, as it was on the car originally. It didn't really properly reach the end of the valance. We've put a new rear valance on the car, which turned out to be slightly shorter than the original, and with remaking various areas on that, everything was rather stretched to fit. It could have been manipulated into place and holes stretched and generally messed about with to the point where it would fit, but it wasn't very satisfactory. So we've put, or Tom is putting, new edges onto this just to extend it, to give us some material to work with. So he's just TIG welding on a new edge onto there, finish that up, and then he can weld these holes up and basically put the holes exactly where they need to be so that everything properly lines up and isn't stretched and holes aren't pulled and things aren't pulled out of shape. So that everything looks right and lines up correctly on the back of the car. So there's a little bit of work involved in that and a bit of slightly unforeseen work there because these ostensibly should have been standard parts, but they're now not. There's that area, and there's also the wheel arch. Tom had observed, along with Cal, that the wheel arch shape wasn't very pleasing at the back, and that the original wheel arches were basically a curved top, and then two almost dead vertical parallel sections front and rear. With the slightly lowered top on the wheel arch, it emphasised those parallel sections and kind of made it look a bit clunky. It looked a bit, to be honest, they looked a bit clunky anyway originally, the rear arch shape on these, but doing that modification then made it look more clunky. So Tom's also reshaped this part of the valance to be more, to carry on a curve rather than being exactly straight. As it was originally on the car. So some modifications on that. Some work on the ends of the rear valance to get that to fit to this, and it's pretty much there then on the back. So hopefully next week, or early part of next week really, should see this pretty much wrapped up. I'll say that, but hopefully that should see that all finished. And then, which I've been saying for weeks now, I feel like, we'll be moving on to putting the running gear in and doing the work around the bulkhead area. So that's where we're at on XJ Coupe. Moving on from that, trying not to trip over all my stuff that I've strewn everywhere, we come on to Audi. Now, I've been trying to work on this solidly this week and failing, such as the peril of trying to run a business as well as do work in the workshop, that there's not a lot of time gets involved in the work in the workshop. But I am making some progress, and I'm probably just less than a day away from all of the jig work being finished. So, to recap for those that aren't familiar with our select jigs and the way they work, you basically have a jig bed, which is this bit down here. I've actually done a little video on this on YouTube on the autofocus series, so if you're interested you can have a look at that. This will be a very brief recap. Select jig bed. This is an MUF7 jig bed, which is that red bit at the bottom, which is basically just a big steel frame that's relatively stiff. Not 100% stiff, it does twist if you don't put it on a flat floor, which is why it's on screw jacks and why we go around it with a machine level, levelling it all, make sure it's exactly right on our incredibly wonky, very, very poor concrete floor. Then on top of that, the Select system uses a set of these beams. All the more modern Select jigs are just the same, or Select frame machine, as the French call them. These beams go on top of that base, and there are a number of those beams. There's a set, a standard set which Select provide, which is more or less what I've got under this. Not quite, we've got some missing, but more or less a standard set of beams under here. They bolt on with a countersunk bolt onto the Select jig frame, and that gives a smooth surface on the top of the beams to then bolt further things on. Now typically, and in a normal application, the further things would be these, which are towers, which are the Select towers. These are part of the Select system. They're a forged steel or cast steel tower, and they come in different heights. So that's an MZ140, it's 140 millimeters tall. They're all on standard bolt pitches, so they bolt to standard locations on the beams, and then they can be rotated, which moves the center of the pin that goes in the top to different positions. That's all standard for all of the towers. They take a 40 millimeter pin, and then what you would then conventionally do is rent a set of fixtures that go into those sockets. Fixtures like these, which are all in a box over there to go back to Body Shop Solutions, who are the main Select UK agents and who hire these fixture sets out. So they then go into the top of those and then bolt to locations on the car. There's a map. You wait there, Jamie, I'll find one for camera. There's a map that would come when you rent the jig, which has all of the locations for the towers, and it has the locations for mechanical out here, so that's for the car without the mechanicals in, and then that, which would be for the car with the mechanical parts in. Now, I mentioned last week that I've had to revise things quite a lot because the mechanical in doesn't allow you to bolt the car down in a number of very important locations on this, and I wanted to make my own fixture set anyway, so I've done some revisions and I've had to make these twin-based towers to be able to do this at the front. For various complicated reasons, I've had to do it that way. I'm not going to go into exactly why, because it'll take me forever. But basically, I've had to make those double-bottomed towers, which has taken a little while to get them all nice and parallel and all set up correctly. So fabricated those, fabricate then the fixtures that go on top of those, and taking those out will then enable me to use the same fixtures, but with the subframe fitted. So that's the plan there, and then I'm just working on the back, doing exactly the same job, making it so that the fixtures can bolt to the body shell as it is now, with no subframes in, but then I can drop the fixtures out, take out the spacers, fit the subframes, put the fixtures back in, and attach the car back to the jig with the subframe in. It's going to be quite important on this job because we've got to put the engine in quite early on because we need to check clearance on the Saab bodywork. Remember, this is going to become a Saab, Project Wasabi. This is an Audi S4, B7 Audi S4 that will be living under a carbon fibre Saab 900 Classic body with some parts of the steel Saab 900 body in terms of the door apertures, window apertures, that side of things. So there'll be some of the Saab body shell involved as well. So that's where we're at on that, just on the latter stages of the fixture fabrication. At that point, we can start structural work on the body shell. So moving forward, just not quite as quickly as I'd like, but that's where we're at. Moving along from that, Stu has been working on this bench here, doing some work on the Interceptor, which we'll go to that actually. I think we'll go to what Stu's been working on. Where are Stu's trays? Are they in the back? We'll go around to the back here. Ah, yes. Stu's been making these, which are some improved, this is a partially done one, improved water drain trays. It was a unique feature we discovered on the Interceptor. Here's another one, which it's bolted in actually, that one's now bolted in. Basically, uniquely on the Interceptor, when you open the tailgate, the water that was living on the tailgate, if it's been raining, pours off and pours into the boot. And the solution to that, to be fair, I can kind of understand the predicament Jensen ended up in on this one because I can't really see a better way around it, short of putting like a rain gutter on the body, which would look terrible on the tailgate. So the next best solution was they created these trays in the boot that catch all the water that pours into the boot and duct it out of the boot through the boot floor, which is fairly Heath Robinson, but I don't really know of a better solution. But what I do know is that we could make them rather better. The originals were beaten up and damaged. They're not particularly cheap to buy new, and probably wouldn't fit anyway because the car's been modified in that area. So Stu's made some new ones in aluminium. He's patterned them up, folded them up. He's got to TIG weld this one yet. He's TIG welding a little spigot onto that little pressed recess in there, which will then attach to a duct bill drain vent, which will go underneath the car and drop the water out. So that's all good. So that's sort of Stu's work. As we're filming on Wednesday, just to explain timings again here, because of the short week, because Jamie's away on Friday. We're filming on Wednesday, so again, the progress this week's been fairly brief because of the timing of the filming. So that's what Stu's working on there. Now, as you can see by this area, Matt is working on this quarter panel, and the reason for the work on this quarter panel was a discovery that we made at the tail end of last week, which has caused us quite a lot of work and a moderate amount of annoyance. Both Cal and I had looked at the car a few times and noted that the fuel filler flap didn't fit particularly well and wasn't really acceptable in fit and finish. So we put a job down for Matt to basically fettle and alter and adjust and titivate the fuel filler flap to make it look nice, which we could have done largely with lead. However, I then started to look further into things and started to investigate the rest of the fuel filler arrangement, which I hadn't. I'm remiss in not having looked at properly prior to that. This was prompted by Matt saying that there was too much play in the fuel filler flap, and correctly saying that there was too much play in the fuel filler flap for him to be able to set gaps around it and do it properly, because it just moves around. So I checked that and discovered that the fuel filler flap hinge would have perhaps been acceptable on a hamster's cage or something, but not really on a fuel filler flap. So that meant we got to refabricate the hinge arrangement. Not too much of a problem. I then found that the box that it was attached into wasn't really acceptable in its construction on a car being built to the standards that would be associated with the sort of costs that this car will be. You know, things need to be done right. You're not talking about cheap cars here, and things have to be done properly, and this is not proper. So we need to remake that. I then discovered that the fuel filler arrangement itself, which uses a production car secure filler, anti-siphon type filler unit, wasn't acceptable either. With the standard of fabrication was terrible, and it was just not acceptable. And also tied into that, we've also realised that the actual fill angle, we possibly should have realised this earlier, but the job would have been the same whether we'd realised it earlier or not, that the fill angle is rather shallow. And I then had a concern that we could spend what would probably amount to a couple of £1,000 in reality, refabricating parts and remaking things, but keeping the same general arrangement, and then find that the first time we try to fill this car up, because we're not going to be able to do this in advance, the first time we go and try and fill this up at a conventional fuel pump, that it causes the pump to shut off because the fuel can't get away from the nozzle quickly enough. And that would be disastrous, because we'd have put a whole load of customers' valuable money into redesigning something that was incorrectly designed in terms of function to start with. So that got us looking into the original fuel tank, the replacement fuel tank height, and where the filler needed to run rather than where it was run to mate up with this, which is what had been done. And that led us to realise that actually we don't need the filler up here, which is where it had been moved to. It can be in the conventional Jensen position down here. That dotted line marks the top of the fuel tank within the car. And as long as the fuel filler is above that, it doesn't need to be a significant drop into that, because there's no reason that the fuel filler has to go into the top of the tank. We regularly don't put the filler in, we put the filler into the bottom of the tank or near the bottom of the tank to get the gradient in the fill pipe. But then obviously, as long as the fill hole is reasonably above the top of the tank, there's no problem filling it, which we feel there won't be a problem with in this position. Because it would be very rare you would fill the tank right to the very top anyway. So we're pretty happy with that. So we're actually, long and short of all this, is we're going to move the fuel filler arrangement and basically loosely put it back to a standard Jensen arrangement. Though if it is on the opposite side of the car, it would normally be on the near side of the car. We're putting it to the off side just because the rest of the fuel tank arrangement has already been done. what's annoyed us a little on this is the general standard of the work involved previously, and that just things had not been thought through correctly, and we've dropped the ball a bit in terms of not finding that earlier, not seeing that earlier, but we found it now and we're doing something about it now. But it has just pushed our timeline back a little, because we didn't anticipate this quite significant piece of work. Because, I'm going to put this down, the issue obviously in closing this off is that we now have to close the inner wheel arch off. Now, that's not really gained as a load of work, because what we discovered is that the original inner wheel arch, where it had been modified to accept the filler up here, hadn't been closed off properly anyway, so we still would have had that work regardless. But Matt's now closed off the quarter panel. He's going to make the sections to close off the inner wheel arch again and get it back to being more or less a standard Jensen inner wheel arch, so that the water from the wheel doesn't spray up inside the car, which is what it would have done as it was. And then once that's all done, we will then let in a new filler down here and create a new pocket in the inner quarter panel and inner wheel arch to accommodate that is sealed to, or that is joined to, the outer quarter panel, so that we seal the elements outside the car where they belong and not inside the car. So that's a loose description of why we're doing what we're doing here and the background to it. And yeah, Matt's making good progress with it. That's very good. Bobby has also been working on the Interceptor on a couple of areas. I'm going to pick this one up first because it's the first thing that I've just seen, which is he's been doing a bit of very nice machining actually. I've only just looked at this. This is the first I've seen it. I know Jamie's done some footage of it, but this is the first time I've actually looked at it in detail. That's rather nice. He's making a balancer, an equaliser for the handbrake mechanism on this car, which is more or less machined by the looks of things there. That's pretty much done. So that just balances the tension from the e-stop unit that we have on this, the electric handbrake motor, which is a linear actuator that pulls the cable. That will then pull the cable in this, and then this will equalise the tension between the two handbrake cables that go to the two wheel assemblies or two brake assemblies out at the wheels. So that's what that is for. It needs to be quite specific to fit in the space available and to do the job it needs to do. So Bobby's machined one of those up, getting a little bit of milling machine time in, which I think he quite likes doing. So that's that. Further to that, earlier in the week, I'm not going to point at it now, but what we're going to do is I'm going to let Bobby do a full little, slightly in-depth, it won't be overly in-depth, but slightly in-depth talk about this. I think we've mentioned previously doing some hardline, air conditioning hardline tooling, because we can't find anybody in the UK. I'd be interested in the comments if anybody knows of anybody doing this, but we can't find anybody in the UK that can swage I would call them a top hat swage or end form onto aluminium hardlines for air conditioning systems. Nowhere in the automotive aftermarket that I can find does that. People supply weld-on ends, which we could TIG weld onto the lines, but for various reasons we're not keen on doing that. And OE original equipment manufacturers make those lines, but I've been to a couple of suppliers who supply low volume car manufacturers who fit air conditioning to their cars, and they don't have the tooling to do it. So I don't quite know what they do, whether they use flexible lines or what, but we can't find anybody that does that. So Bobby said we'll just make a tool, which he did a little very quick trial, which worked. So he's drawn up all the tooling, which I think you've seen in a previous episode, and Jonathan at PBE CNC has machined all those parts in a mixture of materials, but all the tooling is, the dies and the clamp blocks are all done in D2 tool steel, so we can harden them if necessary. We can air harden those if necessary. Well, Jonathan supplied us those parts back at the beginning of this week, so Bobby has done a trial with that tooling on the bench in his little home-built hydraulic swaging machine, and that's all worked a treat. That's all worked really, really well. A couple of very fine dimensional changes, but other than that, absolutely perfect. They were material off, so just some emery cloth type dimensional changes and a slight change on a chamfer that is just modified very slightly on the lathe. Those changes have now been, that was for the first die set, that's for the 5/8 tube. We've also got to do 1/2" tube and 3/8" tube for the two smaller sizes. So Bobby's going to get the tweaks done to the drawings, and then Jonathan will machine the tooling for the other two tube sizes. Then we'll have the full set of tools, and then Bobby will make up a frame. We have a 240-volt hydraulic pump. A friend of mine has just sorted us out a double-acting spool valve, hydraulic spool valve to control it. Bobby will build that little machine up, and then we'll have our own electro-hydraulic driven swaging equipment for making the end forms on aluminium hardlines, so we can do all that in-house, which is something we've been wanting to do for a while, so that's really good. Bobby was working on that earlier this week, making sure that was all working and trial swaging some of the lines that we actually need to do for this car. He's also done some modifications on the chassis of the Interceptor at the front to allow the power steering pipes to clear properly. Originally, as it came to us, there was no room for the power steering lines to clear between the rack and the chassis, basically. The lines have been moved out of the way, but were basically hard up against the chassis. So he's done some tweaks there, well, a bit of fabrication there to get those to clear. So they're now, that's all good now. And then he's been looking at the transmission cooler lines and working out a plan for that, because there's not an abundance of space for those. So he's worked out where to run flexi lines, where to run hard lines, how to route those lines, what fittings we need, and all of the associated stuff to do with getting those transmission cooler lines through from the cooler, which is actually built into the top of the AC condenser in the front of the car, through to the ZF 8-speed transmission, 8 HP transmission that's in the car. So all good progress on that front. I think that's pretty much where we're at on Interceptor, although I'm bound to miss something because it's sort of dotted around progress on that. We're in the final stages, but as I say, things like the fuel filler kicking us sort of when we're on the final run, were quite frustrating. So moving on to the body shop, I'll do a quick recap, a quick cover over it this week instead of Mark, because the progress isn't huge in there this week because we're picking up loose ends basically. The Allegro has now almost finished in terms of flat and polish. This is the orange, the Kubota orange as we've called it in Allegro, is nearly finished in terms of flatting and polishing. Gaz has moved on to working on the splitters, the fiberglass front splitters that you saw me making a couple of months ago now, probably quite a few episodes ago, where I was making those front splitters. They're all completely through cured now, or as cured as they're going to get. Shouldn't move around anymore. So Gaz has been getting those checked against the car, drilling the holes in them for mounting them, trimming them down to the final size, checking that they fit, and then he started on the prep for paint on the splitters for both cars. Steve, as I can hear right at this moment, is polishing, but he's been out and about on a few other missions this week as well, sorting things out in the workshop and doing some running around jobs. And Mark has also been working on the polishing. He's currently moving some cars around, and I think we'll be moving on to stripping the bonnet and the boot for the Project Portofino. They need paint stripping carefully. We can't blast those. I don't want to blast them. I don't want to dip them because we'll have corrosion issues further down the line. And they look good enough that we probably will be. I think we will be able to use them. Touch wood. I think we will be able to use those panels. So Mark or Steve will be probably moving on to getting the bonnet and boot lid stripped for Project Portofino. So then we can move on to the metalwork that's needed on those. I think that pretty much wraps up where we're at. I'm bound to have missed some bits on the body shop. I think there have been various bits of paintwork done in terms of final finishing for parts through in the assembly shop. But I think at that point, I'm going to call it for this week. See you next week for the special. And I'm going to hand over to Cal in the assembly shop and down at the den, because we've got exciting stuff going on down there that he's going to tell you about, that's also going to come up here a little bit the week after next as well. So, see you in a week's time.
Right, thank you very much, Nat. And I'm going to start with Project Kuma, because we had the interior through from Dean last week. So we've settled on this gorgeous kind of bluey grey, can't really describe it, leather for the seats, which is much better in the flesh than the way I'm describing it currently. But we got the door cards, all the little trim inserts for those through, so Gibbo's been working on the interior of this, basically trial fitting everything, making sure everything's fitting perfectly before it all goes in for the final time. It's extremely tight between the cage and the door cards, so the jeopardy of getting those in and out is quite something to behold, but really excited to see all that lot coming together. And then we've had a lot of deliveries inbound, which have opened up lots of avenues on a number of projects. So we had a lot of machine parts through this week. We had a load of stuff from Jonathan at PBE CNC, which included the die sets for the very cool air conditioning hardline forming kit tool that I think Nat's probably already shown. But we also had through the upper arms for Churchill. So every time we've shown the front cross member on that, I've been at pains to point out that the crudely welded together cast upper arms are definitely not the final item. So we've had through the machined version of those now. They're going to go for Xylan coating. And actually there's a load of other stuff backing up for Xylan coating, which I'll go into in a minute. We also had through the cam cover for Project Kuma, which was the last part. There's two parts of the cam cover. The lower part, which is going to be black anodised, and that was conveniently opened up the last routes for Alex, who can lay out the engine management wiring loom now because it's routed through that cam cover, and get all the lengths perfected on that. And then the upper part of it is the last of the accent colour anodising. So on Project 1, the sister build to this, the accent colour was kind of that bronzy colour. And that it was fuel cap, cam cover, and then a number of things in the car, like the instrument bezels, the top of the gear knob, the handbrake bezel on the handbrake grip, some little badges on the speaker grills and the doors, various other parts. On this car, those parts are going to be like a gunmetal grey. So that upper cam cover opened up, sending that whole batch of parts off for anodising, which I think they're literally wending their way there with Steve at the minute to majestic anodising. And then we also had through from Andy Parrott, Concept 303, the machined speaker grills for the Allegro. I think they were the front speaker grills for the Allegro. And I feel like there was another part. Yeah, there was two. A couple of the centre console parts for the Camaro. So there's a section that goes around the gear gaiter, and also a little tray further back in the centre console that's kind of a phone holder and general tray. He's done those two. Jonathan's doing the main machine section at the front of that because it's a more complicated part. So Andy does our slightly more simple parts, 3-axis stuff essentially. The more complicated bits that require a 5-axis machine tend to go to Jonathan. So he's on with that at the minute. And then going back to the Xylan stuff. So Allegro, we are starting the build of the Allegro, and actually that slightly ties back in with Alex in that we want to get all of the electrical components in first so he can then measure up essentially for the rope loom, the kind of mock-up loom we do to check all the lengths and plan out the actual physical dimensions of the loom. So I'm going to get those components start going in very soon. In the lead up to that, Mark's been applying all the Dynamat on the inside of that, just so we could get that lot in there first, so I can actually fit things like the ECUs which mount in the footwell for the final time rather than them having to come out again. And then that led on to what I was just about to talk about, which was the Xylan coating. We were putting all the door handles together. The inner handles and link rods were mint, so we pretty much just reused those as they were. The latches, I think I showed Anthony or James building them back up last week, but we disassembled those, replated all the individual steel parts, rebuilt them, fitted them. We had brand new outer handles to go on them on both cars. However, we did a trial fit of those and then noticed that we weren't entirely happy with the black, whatever black painted finish it was around the bezel was a little bit ropey in places, a little bit chipped in places. It seemed like there was almost like a little bit of corrosion under it in a couple of places because there were no old stock parts. So we've actually decided to strip those new door handles completely apart, which James has just been doing, and then we're going to black Xylan coat the main casting part of it, which is the visible bit on the outside, and then rebuild it all with the new parts again. And then there's a few other bits in that batch, so the Churchill upper arms I talked about, and then some components for the window regulators in that. So there are, what window regs did we use? I think we used classic mini, an aftermarket classic mini electric window conversion kit modified. And some of the bespoke parts that Bobby made in metalwork needed Xylan coating as well, so they've been put in with that batch. And the little corner pieces and window seal channels as well are all going away in a big batch of Xylan coat parts, so as soon as they come back we can get the doors completely built on that. So yeah, that's at that kind of like the stage that all people building cars are excited by, when it's a painted shell and you get to start bolting the bits on, but it's always bittersweet. You get the bits that just go straight on where you planned everything perfectly, and then inevitably there's bits like the door handles, for example, where you're like, yes, that's ticked off, that's ready to fit, and then when you actually look really closely at the brand new parts you bought, they're not quite good enough. So there'll be a series of ups and downs, but I'm very excited to see the progress coming together on that. Other Allegro related stuff, I'm kind of using my visual cues over here behind Kuma, is that James has been on with the gear shifter assemblies. So this was a bit of a twofold. A lot of the parts are available from Honda. I mean, we've generally been very impressed with the fact that Honda aftermarket parts availability for a 1990s car is extremely good. So most of the wearing parts in the shifter assembly, we've just bought new Honda parts, which also came this week. Things like the pivot bush for the actual stick, there's a plastic bush there, all the rubber seals, all the pivot bushes generally throughout the assembly, even all the nuts and bolts. But there was one part, I think it's on the gearbox end of the shift rod, there's like a sort of a joint that wasn't designed to come apart. It's basically a peened over riveted joint, and it's got like a slight detent built into the pivot as well. And we were a bit, do we take that apart, do we not? It's one of those things where you're half tempted to go, well, we can just manually clean up this piece, but inside you really know the proper way to do it is to cut the joint out of it, and then remake your own pin and re-swage it over, which is the route we went down. So James had all that apart, remachine the pin, reassemble it all, and so it's all brand new parts in that little detented joint now. So basically the whole gear shifter assembly is now brand new parts throughout. The idea being with those Allegros, as they're on DC2 floor pans and entire DC2 drivetrain, is that they should feel like a brand new DC2, hence why we're trying to return all of the wearing parts like gear shift linkages, etc., to as new conditions, so you get that new car feel to everything. So I think that probably just about covers where we're at with everything in here. What I'm going to do is go down to the den and show you what's going on there, because there's also exciting stuff afoot there. All right, welcome back to the den. Let's go and have a look what's going on. So, yesterday was a very, very exciting day. I think we've touched on the fact that we were awaiting toolboxes, and yesterday was that every mechanic's Christmas day when all the toolboxes arrive. So we, after a bit of deliberation, decided to go with bunker for basically all of the toolboxes and storage units that are going to be in this workshop. And actually the story of kind of our knowledge of this range starts with this exact unit here, because quite some time ago, well I'd say probably a year ago, Nat was mulling over getting some new workbench / storage units for the Retro Power workshop in the metal shop, and identified these as being pretty unique in the market in terms of how deep they are. They're double-sided, there's storage on both sides, and a really decent depth worktop at a really nice height on them, and they're ridiculously heavy-duty construction. And he thought these would be great for the metal workshop, just because of the layout we've got in there. You're constantly dragging the box to where you're working, and actually having the double-sided approach to it works really well, whereas sometimes, in a lot of situations, the toolboxes are just pushed up against a wall, in which case, obviously, less useful. So yeah, fast forward a little bit, we were musing over who to go with. I mean, this is a range that's been launched by Draper, who, perhaps to some people's surprise, are a British family-owned company. So yeah, you know we like to support that sort of thing as well, so it kind of all just fell into place. We did an initial journey down to their HQ just to make sure we were absolutely happy with the quality, but we are, and they're absolutely spot on. So as you can see in the background, Nick's busily bustling around moving all these boxes to where they're actually going to be, so we can unbox everything in its eventual position and not have to move everything around too much once they're unboxed. But yeah, also you might notice a few arrivals in here. So I can't even remember whether the Stratos was here last week. It probably wasn't. Oh, it was, okay. So we won't dwell too much on that if I mentioned it last week, but Stratos is back in and will be here for our launch party event on the 21st of September. And I'll mention a few more cars that are going to be here. But also, Quattro, short wheelbase. It's basically a Dielinx conversion. So we worked on this car in 2012, I think it was. Long time ago. Car's still owned by the same guy. So yeah, it's absolutely just awesome to see this thing back. And my main overriding memory of this is test driving it. It's 520 horsepower or thereabouts, if I remember rightly. And with it being relatively light and relatively short geared, it is ballistically fast, particularly from a standing start because of the 4x4. And then lurking over here is what I know is one of Nat's, if not Nat's favourite build of all time that we've done, which is this Alpha GT Junior. Just an awesome bit of kit, to be fair. We did a full bare shell build on this. Again, it must have been quite a few years ago now. I'm going to be plucking a number out of the air, but I feel like it was at least 5 years ago. Brief spec on this: complete bare metal restored shell, carbon fibre doors, carbon fibre bonnet, carbon fibre boot lid. We created a complete skeleton boot floor structure with flat aluminium panels to save a load of weight at the back there as well. We did our own Didion rear axle setup on it. So we were trying to get some of the fun live axle handling characteristics that made the original a great laugh to drive, but have a stronger diff in it, lose a load of unsprung weight, and sort out the roll centre problems, which these were well known for having. And that seemed like the best solution, you know, all round. We've got a Ford limited slip diff in there. That's mounted on a custom cradle to the body. Got the Dion beam, which is 6 linked into the shell. It kind of ticks all those boxes that we wanted. And then the owner for this car wanted something that was going to be a lot more powerful, or a good bit more powerful, than you could get from the various Alpha 4-cylinder engines that are available, certainly without modifying them to the point where it's almost not worth starting with an Alpha engine. So we went with good old British engineering. Roy and Julian Millington did a 2.7 litre version of their Millington Diamond engine for it, which is basically an all-alloy evolution of the Cosworth YB, but naturally aspirated. So this is over 300 horsepower, 4-cylinder naturally aspirated. And then mated up to that is a Sadev 6-speed sequential gearbox, and then lots of tasty other parts on it. We've got a kind of nice pared back, almost cafe racer style interior, Recaro pole positions, but done with this beautiful woven brown leather. And then I think we've got Alphaholics brake conversion kit on the front, and probably some other Alphaholics parts on the front. But yeah, such a cool thing, and just, again, like the Quattro, ballistically fast. Right, let's have a little mosey upstairs. Let's see what Richard has been on with this week. Now, I know he's got a couple of things to go into. He's been doing a lot of prep work for the Allegro, which, as you've seen, is approaching the point we'll be able to start doing interior work on it, or getting the interior in, should I say, on it. We've also had a bit more work on Churchill, and we've had a Defender in the workshop, but I will let Richard go into that and explain what he's been up to himself.
Yeah, thank you, Cal. How's it, everybody? Welcome back. Yes, another week here in the den and Retro Power. Was busy. The week kicked off with, we did a Defender commercial, just 2 front seats and a middle section. That was quite cool. Car came in. Some of you might have seen on our Instagram, it was the 1-day turnaround. What we do is we use a pre-made leather kit, really good quality, airbag compliant, all those things. So it's got all the bells and whistles that decent aftermarket set of leather covers got to have. So fitted that on Monday. It looked really good. This was for an actual farmer, because it's a working vehicle. So it was just a plain set with a bit of square stitching on it, sort of copying the original cloth seat covers. But it had all the badges on with the airbag, the actual airbag stitching, proper barcode identification on the inside of the cover, which you guys will never see. I'll see that. Yeah, and then, I mean, the sky's the limit. It doesn't have to be just plain. You can have whatever color you want. We can do whole different variations of insert designs, hexagon, normal, diamonds, perforation, two tones, different color stitching, embroideries, embossings. The sky is the limit, so please inquire and we'll see if we can help you out with your newer vehicle. Other than that, I jumped onto here next to me. You can see there's two Churchill seats now. They're looking beautiful. They're probably about 90%. We got the switches to sort out, and headrest grommets and little release lever bezels like I mentioned before. So we're going to work through those, but that'll be put on the back burner. I think that will be later, but they do look stunning. So have a look, because from here they're going to be bagged and tagged and then neatly put away so that we can keep them that way. So chuffed with that. Other than that, I was busy with the rest of this week is basically just prepping. I'm back onto Allegro, a Lucky Strike 2. So it's the orange one that you guys saw last week. It was prepping this rear parcel shelf, a lot of sanding. It's come out beautiful. You can see these are the loose inserts. So these will have this one will have the different material on, right? So that's an accent strip, if you want to call it that. That's just a bit of leather definition. That'll be leather. You'll notice that it's got a white board on. It's because we make this from foam. And when I pull the leather over, everywhere along the edges, it's extremely difficult to, because it's been done by hand, it's extremely difficult to pull it at the same tightness going around, especially nice little detailed areas like this, because this is going to be in your face when you're looking through the rear window. And basically what I did was, because this is foam and it indents as you're pulling it, I put a hard edge effectively. This allows me to pull the leather and I can pull it really hard. It hits the hard edge and then comes to a dead stop, which then gives us a really defined fresh line, a nice straight line rather, which you've seen the other one. Can't wait to show you this one because it's a different color. It's going to look all amazing. So I've sent some leather away for splitting. We thin this leather down to 0.9 of a millimeter just to give us that extra bit of crispness and to be able to get around the corners nicely and not have nasty pleats and stuff. So that's the parcel shelf. That was a few hours of preparation, but now it's ready. When the leather lands, I can just trim it. And then also door cords. I spoke about door cords on the Lucky Strike 2, which is the brown one, brown interior. Ran out of clips unfortunately, but Kelly's going to order us some more. A lot of prep work. It had to be sanded. I had to recess all the holes for the clips, as I explained last time, because these need to recess. We don't want them to bump through. They need to be loose so that they can self-level. Then with the 2 layers of foam, they're going to look spick and span. So these are going to go back on the shelf. As soon as the rest of the leather arrives, it's trim time, and then I can't wait to show you those. Then moving over to my main bench here, it is Lucky Strike 2 again, back on. One thing that we haven't done is the customer has approved the vinyl for the roof lining, which is basically just a stock standard vinyl identical to what was in the Allegro originally. So it's going to be white, and we're also going to do the sun visors in white. The only thing with these sun visors also, this is quite a bit of work, but the devil is in the details. An ugly sun visor can mess up an interior for me personally. Why? Because it's something that I touch. Being in the UK for the last 5 years of my life, I've realized you use a sun visor way more here than where I'm from, because we've got low sun over here. The sun doesn't go across us, above us like it does in South Africa. And it's something that you touch in your car. It's like the steering wheel and the driver's seat and your driver door cord. You're constantly touching it and you're looking at it. So if that's not crisp, and so many times the sun visors lets it down. So I put a lot of effort into these, because what we've got is, it starts out like this and they're really flimsy. Even if I put this little frame in, I'll show you, all it is, it's just a bit of wire that gets jammed in there. Now when this was new, that's the other way around. When this was new, this foam would have had a little bit more structure to it. But because this is a really old car, it has gone so flimsy. So we don't reuse that, because the first time the customer or us even test driving it, putting those initial miles on the car, that will happen. And within, hours, that will be a flimsy little pig's ear corner, and then that's it, done. Doesn't look nice anymore. So what we do is we rebuild it. There's some footage of all the steps, and I've got some still photos, and Jamie. So it's made out of few materials, plastisode, LD45. The LD45 stands for the density that it's in, so these are nice. The original frame that I've cleaned up and just tidied off, got a little bit of rust off, and a bit of Fomex board. So 2mm sort of papery card. It's the stuff that we used on the Camaro project. Really easy to sand down, so I can shape it really quickly, but it's going to be just rigid enough once it's wedged in between those two with the little frame. All of a sudden we've got a more modern look and feel to it. It's more squishy. When you feel it, touch it, it's not going to collapse, it's not going to bend over, it's keeping its shape, and that will just beautifully go up and down. And because it's so much stiffer, it will allow me to wrap this in the vinyl and then give it a really neat hand stitch over there. And it's going to be super tight, super clean, nice to look at, and it won't spoil that look of your car that you're going to be looking at whenever this thing is down. So can't wait to show you these. Yeah, so a lot of prep work still involved in that, sanding, grinding. You'll see it all on the videos. And then hopefully in next week's episode, I will show you some beautifully covered sun visors. Mark is busy painting the other bits of this for us. That's a bit of plastic. They look good, so we're just going to match that color, and that's got the little hinge mechanism on it. So, and that's about where I am this week. The rest is maybe give the guys downstairs a bit of hand. I'm sure you saw lots of stuff going on, all to the build up, well, so we can start working and for the open day. So yeah, I will see you guys next week.
Thank you very much, Richard. And follow me over here into the lounge area. I think we did have the coffee machine installed last week, potentially. So actually, I think it was here, but it wasn't commissioned. So Roundstone came last week and actually set up the coffee machine and got it all serving perfectly. So super excited that we can offer top-notch coffee here now. And actually that links in reasonably well with the launch event, which I keep banging on about, 21st of September. Roundstone Coffee are going to have a stand outside, which is going to be serving their top-notch coffee. We're going to have 112 Pizza here, who I mentioned previously, serving pizzas rapidly out of a cool old fire truck. We're also hoping now to have a local craft brewery. There's a bar, very well bar, a known bar, in Hinckley called the Elbow Room. They also are essentially a microbrewery as well. This one's still up in the air at the minute. I'm talking to them at the moment, but I'm hoping to have them down here doing a very cool real ale or cask ale, craft ale, that's the word I'm after, bar. So that's exciting. And then in other news, I probably described before that we're going to put together a really nice display of cars in the workshop, and then there's going to be a big display outside chosen from all the people who have applied online to display their cars. But I can now announce a couple of the cars that we're going to have inside the workshop. So I've obviously mentioned the Stratos already. We are going to have Dave Rowe's Group S Audi Quattro here. So this is basically a car. Dave Rowe, who's very well known in the Audi Quattro scene, had an absolutely amazing Pikes Peak short wheelbase car, which he still has. He's been building a replica, or his interpretation, shall we say, of the Group S car. But Jarkel's going to know the knowledge behind the camera on this, but I believe this was developed by Audi. Did they make one or two of them for the Group S series, which was then cancelled before they ever ran the car? Jamie, do those cars still exist? I can't remember. Or was there any?
There's one of the Group S ones that you might have seen, which looks a bit like a sort of Group C endurance race, so it's kind of got all flowing bodywork. But there's the sort of one that looked like a Quattro, just a short sport Quattro, but with a mid-engine. That's the one that there's like 6 grainy photos. Audi found out about it being built on the sly and then had it crushed.
Right, okay, yes.
So that's the one that Dave.
I see. So yeah, so it was basically a car that was created and then swiftly destroyed, which Dave has recreated. So it's a mid-engined 5-cylinder turbo kind of cosmetically loosely like a short wheelbase Quattro, although with clamshells on it, and it is just the nicest build. I mean, Dave Rosebusiness and his EPS Motorsport, the go-to guys for Motec and motorsport electronics. But the car is just stunning, and I can't wait to have it in the workshop. We've also, I was just contacted the other day by a local chap who has got a X-Works Broadspeed Mark 1 Escort 1300, which is also just such a cool thing. It's just freshly been restored elsewhere. It looks so cool. I mean, those 1300, I think it was a BDH engine they had in them. They revved to nearly 12,000 RPM, made over 200 horsepower in the 1960s for touring car racing. It's just, and massive wide arches, awesome looking graphics on it. Can't wait to have that here. And there's going to be a succession of cars I'm going to unveil over the coming weeks. But yeah, if you want to come, you're very welcome. I'd appreciate if you go on the website, hit the button that says register your interest or reserve my place or something like that, and just put your details in, put if you've got an interesting car you want to display, and we will be in touch. And I look forward to seeing you on the 21st, and I will see you again next week.